My name is Ethan Carter, and I never thought death would come for me so soon. I had turned my life around, left behind the chaos, the regrets, the mistakes. For years, I wandered through life like a ghost, haunted by the things I'd done and the person I used to be. But then, I found solace in the church. I thought I had finally made peace with God, that I had been forgiven. I was wrong. I used to be a soldier. I served my country, did things I'm not proud of, things that still visit me in my dreams. When I came back, I was lost. I fell into the wrong crowd, made choices that nearly destroyed me. But I got out. I thought I was free. I thought I had a second chance. That was before the accident. It was a rainy night, the kind where the sky seems to weep for all the sins of the world. I was driving home from the church, my mind heavy with thoughts I couldn't shake. The road was slick, the kind of slick that makes you grip the wheel a little tighter. I remember the radio playing some old hymn, the kind my grandmother used to sing. I remember the curve coming up too fast. And then, the lights. Blinding, searing lights coming straight at me. I swerved, but it was too late. The impact was deafening, a sound I felt more than heard. My body was thrown like a rag doll, and for a moment everything went silent. I thought that was it. I thought I was dead. But then, I opened my eyes. The pain hit me first, sharp and unrelenting, like 1,000 knives cutting through my chest. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't obey. I was trapped, pinned in the wreckage of what used to be my car. The rain was still falling, cold and relentless, mixing with the blood that trickled down my face. I could taste it, metallic and bitter, on my lips. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My vision blurred, the world around me spinning in, a chaotic dance of shadows and light. I could hear distant voices, muffled and frantic, but they felt like they were miles away. Someone was shouting, "Call 911, he's not moving." But I wasn't there anymore. One moment I was in the car, fighting to stay conscious, and the next I was somewhere else. It wasn't like anything I had ever experienced. There was no tunnel of light, no angels singing, just darkness. A deep, endless darkness that seemed to stretch on forever. And then, I wasn't alone. I felt a presence before I saw it. Something vast, something ancient. It wasn't frightening. Not exactly, but it was overwhelming, like standing at the edge of the ocean, knowing how small you are in the face of something so much bigger than yourself. Ethan. The voice wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, a vibration that resonated deep within me. I turned, or at least, I thought I did, and there he was. Jesus. I don't know how I knew it was him, but I did. He looked nothing like the pictures in Sunday school. He was radiant, but not in a way that hurt to look at. His eyes were full of something I can't even describe. Love, yes, but also sorrow. A deep, aching sorrow that made my chest tighten. "You're not ready," he said, and his voice was like 1,000 whispers, soft and firm all at once. "But you need to see." Before I could ask what he meant, the darkness shifted. The void around me dissolved, and I found myself in a room, a strange, dimly lit room with a large round table at its center. Around the table sat figures, men and women, their faces obscured by shadows. They were speaking, their voices low and urgent, but I couldn't make out the words. Then one of them said a name that made my blood run cold. Barron Trump. The name hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and foreboding. I didn't understand why it sent a chill down my spine. Barron Trump? The youngest son of the former president? What could he possibly have to do with any of this? The figures at the table continued to speak, their voices growing more intense. I caught fragments of their conversation, words like prophecy, global order, and the chosen one. It sounded like something out of a conspiracy theory, but the way they said it, it felt real. Too real. One of them, a man with a voice like gravel, leaned forward. "Barron is the key. He doesn't know it yet, but he will. And when he does, the world will change." I wanted to step closer, to hear more, but I couldn't move. It was like I was frozen, forced to watch from the shadows. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Why was I here? What did any of this have to do with me? And then, as if sensing my presence, one of the figures turned. I couldn't see their face, but I felt their gaze, cold and calculating like a predator sizing up its prey. "He's here," the figure said, their voice cutting through the room like a blade. Panic surged through me. I wanted to run, to hide. But before I could do anything, the room began to dissolve. The figures, the table, the shadows, all of it faded away, replaced by that same endless darkness. But this time, it wasn't empty. A light appeared in the distance, small at first, but growing brighter with every passing second. It was warm, inviting, and for a moment, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Then the voice returned. "Ethan." It was Jesus again, his presence filling the void. He didn't speak, not with words, but I felt his message clearly. "You have seen what few have seen, but the world is not ready. Not yet." Before I could respond, the light grew blinding, and I felt myself being pulled, dragged back toward something I couldn't see. The last thing I heard was his voice, soft but firm. "Wake up." I woke up gasping, my chest heaving as if I'd been drowning. The first thing I noticed was the light, harsh, fluorescent, and unrelenting. It burned my eyes, forcing me to blink rapidly as I tried to make sense of where I was. The sterile smell of antiseptic hit me next, followed by the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. I was in a hospital room. "Easy there," a voice said, soft but firm. I turned my head, wincing at the sharp pain that shot through my neck, and saw a nurse standing beside me. She had kind eyes, but there was something in her expression, something guarded, like she knew more than she was letting on. "You've been through quite an ordeal," she said, adjusting the IV in my arm. "Do you remember what happened? The accident, the rain, the lights coming straight at me. It all came rushing back in a flood of images and sensations." I opened my mouth to speak, but my throat was dry, my voice barely a croak. "Water," I managed to say. The nurse nodded, holding a cup with a straw to my lips. I drank greedily, the cool liquid soothing my parched throat. As I drank, I glanced around the room, half expecting to see someone, or something, else, there. But it was just me and the nurse. "You're lucky to be alive," she said, setting the cup aside. "The doctors weren't sure you'd make it through the night." Lucky. The word echoed in my mind, but it didn't feel right. Luck had nothing to do with it. I had been somewhere else, seen things I couldn't explain. And then there was Jesus. His presence, his words, they were etched into my memory like a brand. "You have seen what few have seen, but the world is not ready. Not yet." What did that mean? What was I supposed to do now? The nurse left the room, promising to check on me later, and I was alone with my thoughts. I reached for the remote on the bedside table, turning on the TV in an attempt to distract myself. The news was on, some story about politics, but I wasn't really paying attention. Then I saw him. Barron Trump. He was in the background of a news segment, standing next to his father. He looked so young, so ordinary. Nothing like the figure I'd seen in that strange room. But as I stared at the screen, a cold realization settled over me. This wasn't over. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. Barron Trump was just a kid, barely in his teens, but the way the camera lingered on him sent a shiver down my spine. It was like the universe was trying to tell me something, to remind me of what I'd seen. The room, the figures, their voices. Barron is the key. I turned off the TV, my hands trembling. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. Was it real? Or just some twisted dream my brain had conjured up while I was fighting for my life? But deep down, I knew. It was real. All of it. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. The heart monitor beeped faster, betraying my anxiety. I needed to talk to someone, to tell someone what I'd seen. But who would believe me? They'd think I was crazy, that the accident had messed with my head. Maybe it had. The door to my room opened and I turned, half expecting to see the nurse again. But it wasn't her. It was a man in a suit. He was tall, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to look right through me. He didn't smile as he stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind him. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice smooth but with an edge I couldn't quite place. "How are you feeling?" I didn't answer. Something about him set off alarm bells in my head. He wasn't a doctor, and he sure as hell didn't look like hospital staff. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He ignored my question, pulling a chair up to my bedside and sitting down. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, and studied me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "You've been through a lot," he said, his tone almost sympathetic. "But I need you to listen to me very carefully. What you saw, what you think you saw, it's important that you keep it to yourself. Do you understand?" My heart skipped a beat. How did he know? I hadn't told anyone, not even the nurse. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to sound convincing. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, you do. And let me be clear, this isn't a request, it's a warning." Before I could respond, he stood up, straightening his suit jacket. "Get some rest, Mr. Carter. You're going to need it." And with that, he walked out, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a growing sense of dread. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the door the man had just walked through. My mind was a whirlwind of questions, but one kept rising to the surface. How did he know? The nurse came back a little while later, her cheerful demeanor, a stark contrast to the tension still lingering in the room. She checked my vitals again, humming softly under her breath, but I barely noticed. My thoughts were elsewhere, replaying the man's words over and over in my head. What you saw, what you think you saw, it's important that you keep it to yourself. I wanted to ask her if she'd seen him, if she knew who he was, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he'd looked at me, like he knew exactly what I was thinking. Or maybe it was the fear, cold and unrelenting, that had taken root in my chest. "You're doing much better," the nurse said, jotting something down on her clipboard. "The doctor will be in to see you soon. Try to get some rest, okay?" I nodded, but rest was the last thing on my mind. When she left, I reached for the remote again, turning the TV back on. The news was still playing, but Barron Trump was gone, replaced by some story about a natural disaster halfway across the world. I flipped through the channels, not really paying attention, until I landed on a religious program. A preacher stood at a pulpit, his voice booming as he talked about prophecy and the end times. I normally would have changed the channel, but something about his words caught my attention. "The signs are all around us," he said, his eyes wide with fervor. "The world is changing, and those with eyes to see will understand what's coming." I felt a chill run down my spine. It was like he was speaking directly to me, like he knew what I'd seen. I turned off the TV, my hands shaking. I needed to get out of there to clear my head. But when I tried to sit up, a sharp pain shot through my side, reminding me of the state I was in. The door opened again, and I tensed, expecting to see the man in the suit. But it was just the doctor, a middle-aged man with a kind face and a reassuring smile. "Mr. Carter," he said, glancing at his clipboard, "how are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck," I said, trying to sound lighthearted. He chuckled. "Well, that's not far from the truth. You're lucky to be alive." There was that word again. Lucky. The doctor examined me, asking questions I only half listened to. My mind was still stuck on the man in the suit, his warning echoing in my head. I wanted to ask the doctor if he'd seen anyone suspicious around, but I didn't. Something told me it was better to keep my mouth shut. "You'll need to stay a few more days for observation," the doctor said, scribbling something on his clipboard. "But if everything checks out, you should be able to go home soon." Home. The word felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. How could I go back to my normal life after what I'd seen? After what I'd been told? The doctor left, and I was alone again. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in on me. I needed answers, but I didn't even know where to start. I reached for my phone, which someone had placed on the bedside table, and unlocked it. My hands were still shaky, but I managed to open a browser and type in Barron Trump. The screen filled with articles and photos, most of them from years ago. He was just a kid, smiling in family portraits or standing awkwardly at public events. There was nothing unusual, nothing that hinted at the things I'd heard in that strange room. But then I found it. A forum, buried deep in the search results. The title caught my eye. Barron Trump, The Hidden Prophecy. My heart raced as I clicked on it, but the page was gone. Just a blank screen with the words 404 error staring back at me. I tried again, searching for similar terms, but every link I clicked led to the same dead end. It was like someone, or something, was erasing any trace of what I was looking for. I put the phone down, my mind reeling. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone didn't want me digging deeper, and that only made me more determined. The next few days in the hospital were a blur. Doctors and nurses came and went, poking and prodding me, asking questions I didn't have the energy to answer. I played along, nodding and smiling when I had to, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about the man in the suit, his warning still fresh in my mind. I kept expecting him to show up again to corner me with more threats, but he didn't. Maybe he thought I'd gotten the message. Maybe he was just waiting. The nurse, her name was Sarah, was the only one I trusted, if only because she didn't seem to have an agenda. She was kind, always checking on me, bringing me water or adjusting my pillows without being asked. One night when the hospital was quiet and the halls were empty, I decided to test the waters. "Sarah," I said, my voice low, "has anyone unusual been asking about me?" She paused, her hand hovering over the IV bag she was about to replace. "Unusual how?" I hesitated, not sure how much to say. "Just anyone who didn't seem like they belonged here. Maybe someone in a suit." She frowned, thinking for a moment. "Not that I can recall." "Why? Is something wrong?" I forced a smile, shaking my head. "No, just forget I asked." She gave me a curious look but didn't press further. Still, I could tell she was worried. The day I was discharged, I felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief because I couldn't stand another minute in that sterile, suffocating room. Dread because I had no idea what was waiting for me outside. Sarah helped me gather my things, handing me a small bag with my belongings. "Take care of yourself, Ethan," she said, her tone softer than usual. "And if you need anything, well, you know where to find us." I thanked her, but as I walked out of the hospital, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into something much bigger than myself. The sunlight hit me like a slap, bright and unforgiving. I squinted, shielding my eyes as I looked around the parking lot. My car was totaled, so I'd called a cab, but it hadn't arrived yet. That's when I saw it, a black SUV parked across the street. The windows were tinted, so I couldn't see inside, but I didn't need to. I could feel it, the weight of someone's gaze watching me. My heart started to race, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't let them see me panic. The cab pulled up a few minutes later and I climbed in, keeping my eyes on the SUV as we drove away. It didn't follow us, but I knew this wasn't over. The cab driver didn't say much, which I was grateful for. My mind was too busy racing to make small talk. I kept glancing out the back window, half expecting to see the black SUV following us, but the road behind us stayed clear. When we got to my apartment, I paid the driver and stepped out, my legs still a little unsteady. The building looked the same as it always had, plain, unremarkable, the kind of place no one would look twice at. But as I walked up to the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The lock was scratched like someone had tried to pick it. I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Had they been here? I pushed the door open slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The apartment was dark, the curtains drawn, but nothing seemed out of place. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I flipped on the lights and did a quick sweep of the rooms, checking every corner, every closet. Nothing. Maybe I was just paranoid. But then I saw it. On the kitchen table where I was sure I hadn't left anything was a single envelope. It was plain white with no name or address. My hands shook as I picked it up, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. I opened it carefully, pulling out a single sheet of paper. The message was short, typed in bold letters. You were warned. That was it. No signature, no explanation. Just those 3 words. I dropped the paper like it had burned me, my mind racing. They'd been here, in my home. While I was in the hospital, they'd come here and left this threat. I grabbed my phone, my first instinct to call the police. But what would I say? That someone had broken into my apartment and left me a vague note? They'd think I was crazy. I sank into a chair, my head in my hands. What was I supposed to do? I couldn't just sit here waiting for them to come back. But I couldn't run either. Not with my injuries, not without a plan. And then it hit me. The church. Father Michael had always been a good listener, someone I could trust. Maybe he could help me make sense of all this, or at least point me in the right direction. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, the envelope still sitting on the table like a silent warning. The church was only a few blocks away, but the walk felt like miles. Every sound made me jump. A car honking, a dog barking, even the rustle of leaves in the wind. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the black SUV or the man in the suit, but the streets were empty. When I finally reached the church, I hesitated at the door. It was late and the building was dark except for a single light in one of the windows. Father Michael's office. I knocked softly, not wanting to disturb anyone who might be inside. For a moment there was no answer, and I started to think maybe he wasn't there. But then I heard footsteps, and the door creaked open. Father Michael stood there, his kind eyes filled with concern. "Ethan, what are you doing here? Are you all right?" I didn't know how to answer that. Was I all right? Far from it. But I didn't have the words to explain everything that had happened. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, stepping aside to let me in. "Of course. Come in. Come in." I followed him to his office, a small room filled with books and religious icons. He gestured for me to sit, and I did, my legs finally giving out under me. "What's going on, Ethan?" he asked, sitting across from me. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed, but it came out hollow. Something like that. I told him everything. The accident, the darkness, the room with the figures, Jesus, Barron Trump, the man in the suit, the envelope. It all came pouring out in a rush of words. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with every detail. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled in front of him. "That's a lot to process." "You don't believe me," I said, the words tasting bitter. "It's not that I don't believe you," he said carefully. "It's just extraordinary. And if what you're saying is true, then you're in a very dangerous position." "Tell me something I don't know," I muttered. He sighed, leaning forward. "Ethan, if these people are as powerful as you say, then you need to be careful. Very careful." "I know," I said, running a hand through my hair. "But I can't just do nothing. I saw things, Father. Things I can't explain. And I think I was shown for a reason." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then perhaps you need to find out what that reason is." Father Michael's words stayed with me long after I left the church. "Perhaps you need to find out what that reason is." But how? I didn't even know where to start. The only lead I had was Barron Trump, and I couldn't exactly walk up to him and ask if he was part of some grand prophecy. I went back to my apartment, the envelope still sitting on the table like a silent accusation. I picked it up, staring at the words again. You were warned. Who were these people? What did they want from me? And why were they so determined to keep me quiet? I needed answers, and there was only one place I could think to look. My laptop. I opened it, my fingers trembling as I typed in Barron Trump prophecy. The results were the same as before, nothing but dead ends and error messages. But this time I didn't give up. I dug deeper, searching forums, obscure websites, anything that might give me a clue. And then I found it. A single post, buried in a thread that hadn't been active in years. The title was vague, The Key to the Future, but the content made my blood run cold. It talked about a prophecy, one that had been passed down through secret societies for centuries. A prophecy about a young leader who would rise to power in a time of global chaos, someone who would either save the world or destroy it. The post didn't mention Barron by name, but the details were too close to ignore. It mentioned a chosen one, a figure who would be revealed in the coming years, and it mentioned a book, an ancient text that held the key to understanding the prophecy. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. This was it. This was what I'd been looking for. But before I could read more, the screen went black. I froze, my heart pounding. The power was still on, the lights were still working, but my laptop was completely dead. I tried to turn it back on, but nothing happened. And then I heard it. A knock at the door. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. "Ethan Carter," a voice called from the other side. "We know you're in there." I didn't move, didn't breathe. The voice was unfamiliar, but the tone was clear. This wasn't a friendly visit. The knocking turned into pounding, the door shaking in its frame. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. But before I could hit call, the door burst open. The door slammed against the wall, and 3 men stepped inside. They were dressed in black, their faces obscured by masks, and they moved with a precision that sent chills down my spine. I backed away, my phone slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What do you want?" The leader, a tall man with cold, calculating eyes, stepped forward. "You've been asking the wrong questions, Mr. Carter, and now you've become a problem." I glanced around, looking for a way out, but they had me cornered. The apartment was small and there was no escape route. "We warned you," the man said, his voice low and dangerous. "But you didn't listen." I clenched my fists, trying to steady my breathing. "I don't know what you're talking about." He smirked, pulling something from his pocket, a small black device that looked like a remote. "You will." Before I could react, he pressed a button, and a sharp, piercing sound filled the room. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before, a noise that seemed to vibrate through my entire body. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head as the sound grew louder, more intense. My vision blurred, and the last thing I saw was the man stepping closer, his cold eyes staring down at me. "Sleep tight, Mr. Carter," he said. "When you wake up, you'll wish you'd stayed out of this." And then everything went black.